How balanced is the Baltimore Ravens roster? We talk about that and more next year on Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we return here with another episode of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Ostreicher of Ravens Wire. Of course, we're here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. We're free and available on all platforms. We're back, a midweek edition episodes. We'll be diving into our mailbag in the final segment. Some really nice questions to answer there, 3 of them that we'll dive into. But in the first and second parts of the show, we're going to be talking about the balance of this Ravens roster and something that I've been thinking about for a really long time in terms of how the team has built this roster over the course of free agency, the course of the draft, and not just necessarily going all in on one position while ignoring others. There are some circumstances where the team hasn't added enough for anything at some, but balance in terms of strength and weaknesses and depth and star power, if it's all pretty balanced out, so it's not like there's a huge kind of strength pool, then not a lot of weaknesses in terms of, oh, well, there's this huge drop off. Is there a pretty balanced drop off in between each in terms of what they have depth wise as well? Balance there too. Do they have balanced depth at a lot of different positions? We'll talk about that as well. So in the first segment, we're just going to be doing offense, defense. So in the first segment, it'll be offense. In the second segment, it'll be defense. Just diving into everything, having that conversation there. So really exciting stuff today to talk about here on this, again, midweek Wednesday edition, as we're getting closer and closer to training camp, and the roster can change a bit, right? We still have a little bit of ways to go before the regular season starts, and even before training camp, we're a little less than a month away. So a ton of stuff to dive into today. So if you heard this on YouTube, thank you for tuning in, liking this video, subscribing to this channel. Our next goal on Locked On Ravens, not 2,000 subscribers anymore. At the time of this recording, right when I'm doing it at this moment, we have hit our goal of exactly 2,000 subscribers. I can't even put into words how excited it makes me, the growth that YouTube has had here over the course of less than a year, getting 2,000 subscribers. It's a grind to get there, right? But it's one I enjoy. And I just want to thank everybody who has listened, whether it is once, whether it is every day, or somewhere in the middle potentially as well. This doesn't happen without you, the listener. And I really appreciate everybody's support. And we're continuing to climb here on YouTube for Locked On Ravens. We're setting the next goal, 3,000. We'll go in increments of 1,000 here, maybe like 2,500 before the season starts. That'd be really cool. But it's a cool moment whenever you hit those milestones that you set. And for me, 2,000 subscribers, we've been talking about it ever since the 1,000 subscriber mark. We've been growing fast. And so if you are subscribed, thank you so much. And thank you for your support. If you're new here, you're thinking about subscribing to the channel, we put out daily Ravens content 5 days a week. So whether you want news, opinions, analysis, or much more, be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn notifications on, like the video as well. But in audio form, we're growing fast there too. Anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, we're there for you 5 days per week. Same show, both audio and video, so you don't have to worry about missing anything if you tune in on one platform or the other. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter at KOstriker34 and the Locked On Ravens account at Locked On Ravens. So let's talk about the balance on the offensive side of the ball for this roster. And I know heading into the offseason for the Ravens, we were talking about the offensive line. We were talking about, to a lesser extent, I feel like, the not tight end position, the wide receiver position. Also, the running backs were a key point of contention. What Baltimore has done is they've addressed a couple of those weaknesses: offensive tackle, running back. They've also made what was, I think, a lot of people were more comfortable with compared to previous years into a bit more of a weakness in the wide receiver position, pending what the results are of guys like Rashad Bateman, Devin Duvernay, etc. But when I look at the offensive side of the ball, I do sense a lot of balance depth-wise. I mean, you can even look to wide receivers, an example of that, where they are pretty balanced all the way through there in terms of talent. Your gap between wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 4 right now, there is a gap, right? Rashad Bateman is a better player, in my opinion, than Tylan Wallace. But they're all guys who can push each other, compete. You don't necessarily have this like one big top 10 wide receiver and then a bunch of guys who are heading into their second year. So there's a big talent gap there. They also have balanced depth there because they have 4 very quality wide receivers, albeit pretty young, not a lot of experience there. But then you have kind of a little drop off with Benjamin Victor, Jalen Moore, and then you don't really know what you get in the undrafted guy. So I think that's a pretty balanced position overall. Quarterback, in terms of like star power versus non-star power, that's pretty unbalanced. Lamar Jackson, obviously the face of this franchise. Next on that depth chart is Tyler Huntley. But you still have two very quality players there. So I know that that's a little bit of an outlier, but running back, J.K. Dobbins, Gus Edwards, Tyler Beatty, Mike Davis. And we're going to look at this assuming everyone is healthy at this point. So we'll look at outside linebacker the same way, cornerback the same way, et cetera, in the second segment. But running back wise, you have J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards, both guys very underrated, in my opinion. And they obviously both missed the season last year. So I think they've been forgotten by a lot of non-Ravens fans, national media, et cetera. But I'm excited to see what those guys can do. But then it's the depth as well, balance there with Tyler Beatty, with Mike Davis. I think you have balanced skill sets as well, guys who are very hard runners, are able to hold onto the football. I know J.K. Dobbins had a bit of fumbling his rookie season, a little towards like the beginning/middle, but he was able to shore that up a little bit. So they're guys who can hold on to the football, guys who fight for extra yards, guys who can also catch the ball out of the backfield. I think they have similar skill sets, but not necessarily identical. I think it's good to have a bit of differentiation in your running back. So I'm excited there also. And then you also have the other depth, Justice Hill, Nate McCreary, Ricky Person, all guys who can contribute. So I like the balance there as well. Tight end wise, I mean, that's a very balanced position too. Obviously, again, star power, the drop off talent wise, I guess, between Mark Andrews and Nick Boyle, pretty significant when you talk about just how good of a player Andrews is, but that's not saying Boyle's a bad player. And I know that for Charlie Kolar, Isaiah Likely, you have Josh Oliver there as well. It's, again, stacking the depth, much like at running back, even wide receiver to, I think, a bit of a lesser extent. I think people just want to see a veteran, a little more star power, a little more depth there. I think that would be the ideal addition for a lot of people at wide receiver. But tight end wise, I think you have that balance. You're four deep. Essentially, you could even say you're five deep at tight end if you're the Ravens because of Josh Oliver. I don't see five tight ends making the roster, but you have it there in the balance of, again, having a all-pro pass catcher in Mark Andrews, having one of the best blocking tight ends in the league in Nick Boyle, having two rookies who have very versatile skill sets. Isaiah Likely can do a lot of things lining up in different places. Charlie Kolar profiles a bit to a Mark Andrews type player. So I think the balance there, depth-wise, skill set-wise, is very good. And then offensive line, you're looking at a position, especially outside on the offensive tackle position, where there had to be something done. And the Ravens certainly did do something about it, adding Morgan Moses. They brought Juwan James in on that 2-year deal last offseason, so this is the final year of that deal. Daniel Falele brought in. Patrick McCary can play there as well. So they have a lot of guys there. Depth-wise, again, if you want to talk about the drop-off from star to second stringer, I guess, if you want to call it that, Ronnie Stanley is a much better player than Morgan Moses when healthy, but you now have the balanced depth on your roster to say, well, if Ronnie Stanley can't play for X amount of weeks, whether it's 1, whether it's 6 or whatnot, you have the depth around to say, even if another guy goes down and you're missing 2 guys, you still have that. And I think that is balanced there. On the interior, you have a plethora of depth and it's balanced as well. You have 4 guys competing for the left guard job, it seems like, with Patrick McCary, Terry Phillips, Ben Powers, and Ben Cleveland. Right guard's pretty short up with Kevin Zeitler, so you're not really looking there. And then the center position, Tyler Linderbaum, Tristan Colon, McCary also throwing his name in the mix there as well. So you have balanced depth there, but also the depth to say it at all the positions across the offense. So quarterback, running back, wide receiver, et cetera. You have enough to say, yeah, there are clear strengths, there are clear weaknesses. I think the tight end position is a clear strength. Running back, when guys are fully healthy, a clear strength. I think a weakness is wide receiver, but you're not seeing like a pure strength that is worlds and worlds and worlds better than the weakness. Like, I don't think that the tight end position, I'm looking at, again, everything factored in, not just, oh, hey, is Mark Andrews better than Rashad Bateman, et cetera. When you're looking at everything combined, I think the tight end position, I'd probably say, is the biggest strength, followed by running back. Very close there. Then you can look at star power positionally. Lamar Jackson makes that offense, so you can argue he's up there as well. But again, it's not like the Ravens have quarterback, then huge drop-off, then tight end, then huge drop-off, running backs, and then little drop-off, then huge drop-off. It's not that big of a drop-off. I would say the wide receiver position is a bit down there in terms of just the unknowns, but I think you have little drop-offs between your best positions there, which, again, you can order them however you want to, whether it is quarterback, tight end, running back, exterior offensive line with the tackles, interior offensive line with the guards and the centers, and then wide receiver probably coming in last. And you can organize those rankings however you want to. But I think depth-wise, star power-wise, positional skill set-wise, the Ravens offense is a very balanced team. Could they stand to add another wide receiver? I still think the best option there is Julio Jones, but that's just me. I don't think it's the end of the world if they don't add somebody, right? I think that they still have the talent there. But at the same time, what they have built, what their vision is, it clearly looks like on offense, they want to go back to kind of that ground and pound bully ball offense that we saw in 2019 and 2020, but they just didn't have the personnel to do in 2021 based off of the running back injuries, the tight end injuries, the offensive line injuries. They've addressed that. They've stacked their depth. They've balanced out their roster. So now when looking at the positions, it's not like all of a sudden you have, all right, Lamar Jackson, star quarterback, Mark Andrews, star wide receiver, Marquise Brown's your number one guy, and then it's, all right, who are these other guys? Rashad Bateman is still a rookie. What's he doing? Offensive line, you have Ronnie Stanley out, so what are you doing there? Obviously, Dobbins and Edwards done, but now with everybody fully healthy, the rosters, it looks so much more balanced, and so I'm excited to see what they can do on that side of the football in 2022. But still a ton to talk about here on the show. When we get back, we're going to be diving into defensive balances on this roster. So pretty much going into the same details we did on the offensive side, just over on the other side of the ball. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I want to tell you a bit about Rock Auto, and this episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. And with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why endure from pointless or seemingly intimidating questioning and wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts in their computer? Choosing the only brand the warehouse happens to carry will now have you access to rockauto.com at home and in your pocket. And why you should choose Rock Auto is because you can save time and money. When using Rock Auto, they are a family business. They also have very reliably low prices for every customer, super, super low. You can go explore the Easy Do's website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now, see the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On, and how'd you hear about us box? So they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. We're back here. Our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still here with you on this fine Wednesday. And we're going to now dive into the defensive side of the ball balance-wise. So there's a lot to talk about. Also, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to subscribe to this channel on YouTube for daily Ravens content. Follow us in audio form for daily Ravens content as well. But yeah, defensively, I think there's a little bit more discrepancy when it comes to the biggest strength versus the biggest weakness. I would call the biggest strength on the Ravens, it's defensively, the safety position / secondary, however you want to classify it. I'm just going to say safety for right now. Kyle Hamilton, Chuck Clark, Marcus Williams, Tony Jefferson, Geno Stone, Ardarius Washington, Brandon, whoever you want to classify as safety. I know Ardarius Washington and Brandon Stevens. Some classify as corner, others as safety. I classify both as cornerbacks, but some still put them in the safety category. But regardless, top five guys in Williams, Clark, Hamilton, Jefferson, Stone. It's a very deep room, very talented room, star power, depth, etc. The biggest weakness on this roster right now, defensively, in my opinion, is the outside linebacker position. I've been saying that for months and months. You know, the Zadarius Smith signing falling through definitely hurt their depth there in terms of just, having Zadarius Smith versus not having Zadarius Smith. And look, it happened, right? You can't dwell on it. But you're looking at fully healthy. I think it's a bit better of a discrepancy. And we're looking at this again, like guys are fully healthy, but still, Tyus Bowser, David Ojabo, you don't necessarily know when they're coming back. And the reason I'm putting more emphasis on injury in this situation is because it almost feels like with Dobbins, Edwards, Peter, Stanley, it feels like, and again, no doctor here, no inside information, but with those guys suffering injuries, when they did the recoveries, etc., maybe they have a stint on the PUP list, then they're back. We don't really know when they're coming back at this point, but with David Ojabo, Tyus Bowser, we really don't know when they're coming back. And not saying that we know with the other guys, but I just feel like it's a position where also if they aren't able to come back, if Dobbins, Edwards, Stanley, Peters, etc., aren't able to come back, the Ravens, I think, are better positioned there to lessen the blow of not having any one of those guys. At outside linebacker, it's a bit different in this situation. And again, I've been saying for months, re-signing Justin Houston should be something that should be on the top of their priority list. I think that it probably is, but again, they gave him that UFA tender. But right now you're looking at Adafe Owe as outside linebacker number one. You're looking at Dalen Hayes as outside linebacker number two. And then Vince Beagle is there. You have undrafted guys, Jeremiah Moon, I'm very high on out of Florida. You have Chuck Wiley. But I just think that the outside linebacker position as it is right now, even if you want to throw Tyus Bowser's name in there, David Ajabo's name in there, compared to the safety position, is a lot bigger of a gap. And obviously with Bowser and Ajabo not in there, the gap widens significantly. So I think that in this situation, I think offensively the roster is a tiny bit more balanced, but then the gaps between safety and cornerback, right? Not a huge drop off. The gap between cornerback and defensive line, let's say, not a huge drop off. Inside linebacker, a bit of a drop off there. I mean, Patrick Queen, Malik Harrison, Josh Bynes, very solid players overall. I wouldn't say they have necessarily a star. Patrick Queen hasn't ascended to star level yet. Certainly has the potential to, but he hasn't yet. So I think that the two of, I'd say, the biggest weaknesses on this team are outside linebacker and inside linebacker, plus whatever you want to classify wide receiver as. But I think that that's depth-wise not as big of a weakness right now as outside linebacker is. So I think Justin Houston, we'd be having a different conversation right now. But again, you're relying on two second-year guys to be your top two outside linebackers, assuming that Tyus Bowser and David Ajabo aren't ready. And again, we just really don't know those timelines right now. But I think when looking at each other position, safety, again, very balanced star-wise, depth-wise, positional versatility-wise. You can play those guys all over the field. Same thing with cornerbacks. Marlon Humphrey, Marcus Peters, and everybody involved. Kyle Fuller, the two rookies with Pepe Williams and Jalen Armour-Davis. So they have a lot of options there. On the defensive line, I personally love their defensive line depth. It's one of my favorite positions on this roster right now. Calais Campbell, Travis Jones, who I'm super, super high on. Again, second round guy in my opinion. They got him in the third. Somehow, I still can't explain that one to you. But then they have other good pieces. They have Michael Pierce. They have Brent Urban. They also have a couple other players like young guys, just Madubuike, Broderick Washington. So I'm very confident in that depth. But again, it's not like there is massive drop-offs. I think the biggest drop-off you might see is from whatever defensive line ranks to inside linebacker followed to outside linebacker. That may be the biggest drop-off that we see. Maybe on offense, you could argue it would be from wherever you rank the fourth position or fifth position to wide receiver. But I still think that outside, they have good positional versatility with Adafe Owe, what he brings, Dalen Hayes, what he brings, some of these undrafted guys as well. But especially on the defensive side of the ball, this team values versatility. They value the depth, especially in the secondary. They've invested in the secondary for years now, giving out big money contracts, high draft capital spent at that position. And it shows, especially this year, because what did we see last year? It was the biggest weakness defensively of this team. And there were a couple of them. But the biggest overall weakness, I would say, would be the secondary in just all the bottom five categories they ranked in last year, the injuries that they went through. I think positionally, they have a lot more flexibility. They're able to, again, withstand the blow of maybe not having Marcus Peters to start the year. If that is the case, they now have more depth at that position. It has changed. I'm not saying Anthony Aver's a bad player. I'm not saying Tavon Young's a bad player, et cetera. But the depth has certainly changed. But I think some change was almost needed in a sense, just to get some fresh bodies in there, figure everything out that way. So I'm really excited about where this roster is right now. I don't think it's finished. I think they should still make a couple of other additions. I still think veteran wide receiver, veteran outside linebacker are the two I'd really focus on. The inside linebacker position, I do identify it as one that is, I'll say, not a strength nor a weakness. I think it is solid, like a medium tier position. But I just think the need for an inside linebacker on this team is dwindling at this point because of what they can do with 3 safety looks, 6 DB looks. This is a team, and I've said this before, that doesn't run 100% base all the time, right? They don't run a base defense all the time. They utilize guys in different positions. So if you want to play Chuck Clark as that second linebacker, if you want to play Tony Jefferson there, Kyle Hamilton there, you can do that and have them play alongside Patrick Queen one snap, Josh Bynes the next snap. They don't have to play with 2 inside linebackers consistently on the field all the time. So maybe when figuring out their roster, they'll say, you know what, we don't have to add another guy at the position because we already have guys that can play there for using 3 safety looks. So I'm not necessarily saying, oh, they have to go out there and sign a veteran inside linebacker. I think Bobby Wagner would have been great. I think that would have been a phenomenal addition, but there's no Bobby Wagner on the free agent market anymore. I don't think making a trade for a guy at this point makes a ton of sense at that position. I think for the most part, Baltimore's roster is pretty set. I think we will probably see 1 or 2 more additions depending on what positions they're at. Maybe, again, hopefully an outside linebacker, hopefully a wide receiver. But at the end of the day, I think even without any more additions, if this is the roster we see week 1, I don't think that they are in a spot where they have to panic and say, oh, well, this is an absolute like horrible weakness. I think the closest they are to that is outside linebacker, just based off of the lack of depth overall they have. But at the same time, the rest of the balance on the roster, gap wise, and if you want to combine everything, if you want to combine offense and defense and even special teams in there, can't forget special teams, the drop-offs from the position of strength to the position of weakness from first to worst might be decently big, but all the ones in between that, it's like gradual step down, or step up, right? Gradual step ups, however you want to look at it. I think that this team is very balanced. I think, again, that they should add one or two more guys, but as it stands right now, they've done a good job filling out depth. They've done a good job balancing star power with that depth, with positional versatility all across the board on both offense and defense. So I'm looking forward to seeing what they do, who they add, what positions they look to add. And this, again, we're not finished yet here. Still training camp to go, still the preseason cut down day. Will there be any salary cap casualties potentially that could come available that teams could just not have the room for? Any potential trades, both for the Ravens or coming in? Well, I guess going out for the Ravens or coming in for the Ravens is a better way to put that. But there are still so many avenues they can explore. I'm excited to see what those avenues are. But overall, I am pleased with what they have done with this roster. But still, again, we still have some more time to see what they end up doing before the season does begin. But we still have a ton to talk about here on the show. We're going to be talking about our mailbag questions coming up here in the final segment, talking about some rookie expectations and more. So be sure to stay tuned. Still a ton to talk about here on Locked On Ravens. First, though, I do want to tell you a bit about BetOnline, and BetOnline.net is the number one source for all your sports betting needs and sports info. You can find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's NHL playoffs and Major League Baseball, but now pretty much just Major League Baseball because the Avalanche won the Stanley Cup Finals. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information, including live betting, esports, and scores. And BetOnline.net remains the best spot for all your sports scores, podcasts, and news this season. BetOnline.net is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite sports and events, including MMA, boxing, and golf. That's the website today. Use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in action. BetOnline, where the game starts. We're back here. Our final segment of Locked On Ravens here on Wednesday. Kevin Oestreicher, your host, still here with you. Again, thank you for making Locked On Ravens your first listen of the day. Be sure to follow us in audio form, subscribe to us on YouTube. It all helps out a ton. And be sure to make your second listen of the day Locked On NFL. If you missed out on my Monday show there, be sure to check it out. We talk with experts from all around our network. But let's talk about some mailbag questions now. We got three good ones. We'll first start off with a question from Ophie Defoy, who says, hello, Kevin. Our 2022 draft class seems excellent. Which veterans, in your opinion, are the most in danger before training camp? Thanks for the show and have a nice day. Well, you have a nice day, too. And thank you for the question. This is a good one because, yeah, the draft class seems it is really good. I totally agree there. But I assume which veterans are in danger before training camp means to be cut potentially. With 11 draft picks, I'm assuming all 11 guys will make this roster, barring something unforeseen, in my opinion. The Ravens, it's been a bit more, I guess, inconsistent in the Eric DeCosta era, but Ozzie Newsome was rather consistent about keeping draft picks around for at least a couple of years, seeing what they had. Eric DeCosta is not afraid to let a guy go before year one ends or before training camp or before whatever, if it's not the right fit, which I'm not saying either is right or wrong, right? But it's just the differences in philosophy between, the old general manager versus the new general manager. So the way that Eric DeCosta does things, there's not a 100% guarantee. Like if Ozzie Newsome was still there, I'd say, yeah, there's like absolutely no way. But with Eric DeCosta, there is a little bit of, well, maybe if this happens or that happens. Eric DeCosta's not afraid to do what it takes to win in terms of maybe sacrificing a talent down the road for a guy that can help the team win in this situation. This is definitely not a win or everything is done for the Ravens this year, but they want to win. And Eric DeCosta is going to do what he can to make sure that he puts the team in the best position to do that, even if it is sacrificing a draft pick here. I mean, Ben Mason, Sean Wade, two guys who didn't make it out of training camp with the Ravens last year. So it is something that Eric DeCosta could do. But in terms of veterans, if the Ravens do keep all 11 draft picks, I'm assuming Eric DeCosta does that, but we'll see. I think the biggest guys in danger, Justice Hill, someone who Tyler Beatty could replace. You look to a guy like Ardarius Washington or Geno Stone, who aren't necessarily veterans, but a guy with Kyle Hamilton's presence, he's not going anywhere. So if the Ravens need some secondary depth somewhere else, Kevon Seymour, another guy with Hamilton, Pepe Williams, and Jalen Armour-Davis, those guys aren't going anywhere, in my opinion. So that pushes out other guys there. terms of center, Tristan Colon could be somebody who gets the short end of the stick just based off of depth if the Ravens don't want to keep like 3 center players, Patrick McCary, Linderbaum, obviously, and Tristan Colon. He could be a Ben Powers candidate. Speaking of Ben Powers, I think Ben Powers is one that's a popular pick among people to potentially be off of this roster come week 1. I just think that if he doesn't show enough to make this roster to win the left guard job, there could be a Ben Bredeson situation there too, where he's traded for draft capital because the Ravens know that, maybe they'd like to keep him, but they just don't have enough roster space to keep 11, 12 offensive linemen this year. They have to focus other places. Kristen Welch potentially could be somebody you could look at. Other ones, Amon Marshall's back in that secondary conversation. Tight end wise, Josh Oliver with the 2 tight ends added. There is not a ton of space there. I think 4 tight ends is what they're going to keep, and I don't see any of the top 4 guys getting moved, so I think that Oliver is the odd man out there. Other than that, though, I don't see any big names. It would have been Derek Wolfe if he was still with the team. I mean, with that, I think the Ravens are going to keep all their defensive linemen. Outside linebacker, just not enough depth there for me to say anything definitive. Inside linebacker, I talked about Kristen Welch. And then, I don't think anything other than that. So there are some veterans who definitely have their roster spots in jeopardy because of the sheer number of rookies the Ravens brought in, which is fine, right? Again, rookies they're not just young guys who can never contribute. We see rookie contributions all the time. The Ravens have seen rookie contributions all the time. So just because a guy's a rookie doesn't have the experience doesn't mean he can't contribute more than a veteran would. So I think that some of those guys I talked about could potentially be off of this roster just because of the sheer size of the Ravens draft class. Our next question here comes from Jalen Ware the third. There are 2 here from Jalen. And the first question, which rookie or 2, if any, has the best chance of starting day 1? This is a good question. I think for me, the rookie most likely to start day 1, this is going to be an interesting one. I'm going to say Tyler Linderbaum because I think that if you want to put a pure starter label on somebody, I don't think Kyle Hamilton gets a starter label off the bat. I think the 2 starters, like if you are starting 2 safeties and that's who you're starting, I think that it's going to be Marcus Williams and it's going to be Chuck Clark. But Kyle Hamilton is still going to have a huge role on this team in his rookie season. Huge, right off the bat, huge role. But in terms of an actual starter label, I think that Tyler Linderbaum does have the most likely chance to start in week 1 because I think that maybe like the first official depth chart the team releases, it will be Patrick McCary in there, Tyler Linderbaum 2 in terms of center, maybe even 3. Maybe the Ravens have him at 3rd behind Tristan Colon just for the rookie veteran stuff. But I think come week 1, Linderbaum will probably be starting. I'd be pretty shocked if he didn't. So I think that Linderbaum has the best chance to get that starter label, but Kyle Hamilton's role is going to be huge. Other guys who I think could establish potential starter roles depending on injuries. I mean, Travis Jones is somebody. I still think the veterans will start there. Calais, Campbell, Michael Pierce, even just guys like just BK, but he's going to carve out a huge role for himself. I do think the whole notion of a starter at this level it's not like the NBA where you're coming off the bench and, you're sitting on the bench for the first 8 minutes of the first quarter. And then you come in and starting off the second half on the bench. The Ravens can use these guys in roles where, second snap of the game, Kyle Hamilton comes in, or he's on the field for the first snap of the game. But then in the actual starting lineup card, he's not actually in the quote unquote starting lineup. So it's a very interesting thing. I know some people do value the actual title of a starter a bit differently than others. So I'm going to say Tyler Linderbaum, but both Linderbaum and Hamilton will have big roles during their rookie seasons. And finally, our last question here from Jalen, who will the better player be in 3 to 4 years, Hamilton or Linderbaum? Oh, this is two good questions from Jalen, man. I think that in 3 to 4 years, the best out of those 2 is going to be Kyle Hamilton. Not saying Linderbaum isn't going to be a good player, but I just think the overall ceiling on a player like Hamilton, where I literally think he has a potential to be 3 to 4 years, a top 5, top 4 safety in this league based off of the skill set that he has. Linderbaum also has the potential to be a top 5, top 4 center with the position skills that he has. I just think there are a few more question marks surrounding Linderbaum in terms of what can his ceiling be with the length and with the height and everything. I personally, and I've said it before, I don't put as much stock into height as other people do. I think if you can play, you can play. It doesn't matter what your height is. I mean, unless you're like, really, really short for your position. But I do think that Linderbaum has that potential, but the ceiling for Hamilton in terms of being that safety, being somebody who's this multidimensional player, can roam the center of the field, can play up in the box, physical, ball hawk type player. He has all these skills to me. So I think both players will be really, really good, like top 10 at least at their positions. But I just think the ceiling is higher for Hamilton. So my pick would be Hamilton. I think that Hamilton has the highest ceiling of the entire Ravens draft class in terms of players. I think there are a lot of guys who, again, when we're looking back in 3 to 4 years, we could be talking about players who, Pro Bowl selections, all pro selections, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm so intrigued by what Hamilton can be at this level. I am still almost like in shock a little bit that he fell to 14 just based off the player that he is and what he can bring to the table. So I just think, again, and also like positionally, I know generally, right, not dismissing importance or anything. Center is very important, but I think the ceiling for a top 4 safety is higher than the ceiling for a top 4 center in some circumstances, not all circumstances, but, based off of the impact they can make, and it's all stat stuff too sometimes, right? Like centers, offensive linemen don't show up in the stat sheet in terms of, they caught X amount of balls or they had X amount of sacks, right? But the impact is still obviously there. So I think both players are going to be making a huge impact. I just think the ceiling of Hamilton is out of this world. So I'm taking Hamilton in terms of who's going to be the better player in 3 to 4 years. But that's all I have for you here today on Locked On Ravens. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to get back here tomorrow. We'll be diving into more Ravens content. So be sure to stay tuned for that. I will see you right back here tomorrow.